Coming live from our studios in Belize City, this is the evening news on Love Television for Tuesday, July 12th. We get you started with a look at the stories making the headlines today. Chamber of Commerce and Industry weighs in on BTL Arbitration Award. Foreign Minister Wilfred Elrington provides update on recent heads of government meeting in Guyana. Taiwanese government hands over annual donation to National Celebrations Commission, and Universal Postal Union holds training sessions in Belize. The BTL Arbitration Award has been the topic of discussion ever since the final ruling was made late last month, indicating that Belize would have to pay approximately $500 million to Lord Michael Ashcroft for the company. The Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry issued a release today addressing the award. The BCCI says the most critical and sobering question is how to keep our country afloat while servicing the massive and growing national debt, and at the same time create economic growth. The BCCI says there will be no improvement in the economy unless government commits to not implementing any new taxes and no further tax increases. It says the issue of tax and duty evasion must be addressed with the utmost seriousness, and evaders must be dealt with to the fullest extent the law provides. It points out that inefficiencies in government places an undue burden on taxpayers. Structural efficiencies can be obtained through strategic changes in energy management, asset management, service standardization, and merit-based personnel management. The final recommendation from the BCCI is that urgent measures and policy adjustments be put in place to encourage entrepreneurship, innovation, business development, and investment should be applied with urgency. The BCCI says it makes itself available to assist and be an agent for positive change in any such effort. The BCCI says it maintains its position that any nationalization should be an act of last resort since it undermines investor confidence. The BCCI says it reiterates the view that the BTL accommodation agreement was an egregious document and no government should make such a commitment ever again. It goes on to say while it applauds the decision to negotiate the settlement of the acquisition, it cannot support the manner in which the negotiations took place since it is their belief that Belizeans should have been consulted on the decision of that magnitude. The woes of correspondent banking continue to plague the Caribbean countries despite several efforts and meetings held to see how best the challenges can be mitigated. When the Caribbean community met in February in Belize, a special financial task force was put together to see how best the issue can be addressed. 5 months later, the community met again in Georgetown, Guyana, with the issue of correspondent banking being tabled again. Foreign Minister Wilfred Elrington attended those recent meetings. He spoke to Love News on the discussions.
Progress has not been spectacular, but we have been trying. It's a very difficult situation because what is really needed is for a change in the laws in the United States. And to do that, you have to have the United States Congress get involved. But you know, the Congress has been deadlocked on most things. We took the decision to try to see whether we can do more political work, get our citizens abroad, the diaspora, which is so important, to intervene with the Congress people in the United States to see whether we can get them to move on it. It's going to be a difficult thing to do, especially given the election season, but we can't give up. We've got to be persistent.
Eyes from all around the world are looking at how the de-risking movement by the American banks is affecting businesses globally. Just yesterday, the Reuters news agency did a news piece on the correspondent banking with a focus on Belize. Here is that news package.
The aftershocks of the 2008 financial crisis still being felt far from Wall Street in the Caribbean, where tighter controls and aversion to risk have left nations such as Belize essentially cut off from the international banking system. Yagana Torbati traveled to Belize and saw firsthand the effects of the trend known as debanking or de-risking.
I went down to Belize City. I interviewed different Belizean business owners, and Belize is really ground zero for this trend. Only 2 Belize banks maintain any relationships with U.S. banks. The businesses that I spoke to, it used to take them moments to clear transactions and to pay their suppliers in the U.S. or abroad, and now they really have to set aside weeks.
U.S. banks like Bank of America, Citibank, and Wells Fargo have been pulling out of the Caribbean altogether.
There's been a greater focus among regulators, among U.S. banks and European banks on getting rid of any business that is seen as even slightly risky. The Caribbean countries, because they're small, they don't have much of a manufacturing base, they depend disproportionately on trade. So losing those banking links can be really harmful to their economies. The Caribbean officials that we've spoken to say that it really raises the possibility that their economies could really go belly up and their societies could be destabilized.
Regulators enforce the tough new banking rules, but they also discourage de-risking.
Regulators say that they don't encourage de-risking, they don't want to be seeing it, but those remittance services are used by the world's poorest people to send funds back and forth, and they often keep entire families out of poverty with their wages. And so that raises real concerns among the World Bank and other international organizations that the global goal of financial inclusion is really being hampered by this trend.
The Fiscal Times online publication penned a similar article dated July 12, 2016. The lengthy article speaks of the challenges being faced by investors to Belize and Belizeans living abroad who send monies to Belize regularly. It reads in part, and we quote, "This so-called de-risking or de-banking, in which banks pull out of certain lines of business and even parts of the world, has intensified. Enhanced scrutiny on financial fraud and new regulations to stem money laundering and terror finance are all at play. Yet the de-risking movement has triggered a collision of interests. As banks tighten controls, small, poor countries most dependent on trade say they are being unfairly cut off from global finance. A case made by Barrow, the regulators all agreed that absent a solution, our economies, our societies would go belly up. He recounted in a speech in February. But in the end, his group left Washington little more than tea and sympathy. Just 2 banks in Belize maintain correspondent banking relationships with U.S. banks, Atlantic Bank and Scotiabank, each of which have international affiliations. Such bilateral links allow banks to finance trade, settle credit card payments, and clear the U.S. dollar-denominated transactions that underpin global commerce. De-risking threatens the fragile economy of Belize, a country the size of New Jersey with a population of 375,000, a 40% poverty rate, and an economy based on farming and tourism. Businesses now must set aside weeks to make routine payments to suppliers abroad that used to take moments. Desperate to pass muster with American banks, Belizean banks have dropped customers carrying potential risks, including cash remittance services used by many people working abroad. Every day, Belizeans struggle to surmount trade barriers. In South Belize City on a June weekday, Yvonne Williams visited a Western Union agent tucked inside a Chinese-owned grocery with her 2 daughters. The nursing assistant lives near Boston and is building a home in Belize for her retirement. It is becoming harder to send money to Belize, Williams said. She tried to send $700 from the United States to Belize about 3 months ago for construction on her home, but the transaction was delayed and she couldn't pay her workers. She believes the size of the transfer attracted attention. Santander Group, a Guatemalan company with a major investment in Belize, has had trouble bringing cash in and out of the country and closing financing from international banks for its sugar mill, which employs around 700, said Director Edgar Hernandez. 10 banks have been willing to lend us money, but not us in Belize, Hernandez said. We're exporting everything that we produce, so every time you have commercial activity and you don't necessarily have the proper network banking-wise to channel those funds, that creates transactional costs. What's happening in the Caribbean is part of a larger saga in which tighter banking controls are prompting the world's top financial institutions to avoid not just known terrorist groups, but also cash remittance services, charities, foreign embassies, and other classes of customers, many of whom have no role in criminal activity. That conflict threatens global goals of providing financial access to the world's poor. Caribbean countries are vulnerable because they depend on foreign trade to survive. Belize's currency is pegged to the US dollar, and the United States is its most important trading partner. It is too soon to trace broad economic impact to lost banking ties. In 2015, for instance, Belize received 82.4 million in remittances, compared to 78 million the previous year, according to the central bank. Yet evidence exists de-risking is driving business to a hidden world of cash transactions that will make it harder for regulators and law enforcement to track money flows. One Belize businessman who declined to be named said in order to pay a loan in Belize, he must travel to another Caribbean country to withdraw US dollars and carry the cash back to Belize. I do that every month, he said. I can't send a wire from my bank to my loan account in Belize. End of quote. Tomorrow we will have more on the recent research done by the Fiscal Times on correspondent banking and the ramifications in Belize and the Caribbean in general. Correspondent banking was not the only item tabled on the agenda at the recent meetings of the CARICOM's 37th regular meetings held in Georgetown, Guyana last week. Belize's foreign minister is back in the country, and he spoke with Love News on the gist of the sessions he sat in.
I thought it went very well. As a matter of fact, this is one of the very few meetings where you actually had most heads of government turned up. I think I was perhaps the only person who was not a head foreign minister, but all the other heads of government turned up. Discussions were very lively, animated, and I think there's certainly a renewed resolve and seriousness to enhance the process, in particular the single market and economy. Discuss questions like the free movement of people, that's very, very important. Issue of security, question of the banking and de-risking. Those are all issues which we dealt with.
Hold on. For which solidarity and support for Belize in its territorial referendum with Guatemala was expressed.
Got an overwhelming support from the heads. As a matter of fact, normally at meetings like this, there's a communique that is given, and it usually has a paragraph supporting Belize's sovereignty, territorial integrity. Now we had that paragraph included in the main body of the communique, but in addition to that, we had a separate and apart annex, which commends us for the effort we are making to deal with the new accommodation agreement, the mechanism for this last tune, commending us for agreeing to do the mechanism, urging us to try to get it done as quickly as possible, urging us to do all that we need to do to get the matter before the ICJ, of course subject to a successful referendum. So we're getting good progress on that ground as well.
Minister Elrington returned home over the weekend after staying for the funeral service of the 6th Prime Minister for Trinidad and Tobago, Patrick Manning. Yesterday, we brought an interview with, this morning, we brought an interview with Will Mejia of the Belize Territorial Volunteers, who traveled the Sarstoon on Sunday and found that the illegal fishing by the Guatemalans continue unabated, despite the presence of Belize's military at the forward operating base. To add to the offense of entering Belize's waters, the Guatemalans are doing gillnet fishing, an activity that environmentalists and agencies have frowned upon. Joining the line of those who disapprove gillnet fishing is the Belize Coast Guard. And to express solidarity with the advocacy to ban gillnets, they recently wrote a letter to Oceana Belize. Commander of the Belize Coast Guard, Admiral John Borland, spoke of their position on the issue while citing incidents of how detrimental gillnets can be.
Fishing, in my opinion, goes back more than 25 years working in the environment, is that it's destructive and indiscriminate practice where the end results are more detrimental than the beneficial. And so that's the Coast Guard's position, and it's not only my position. There are other people in the Coast Guard that are equally as competent and trained and as educated as I am in the marine environment and dealing with best practices. And you know, we don't just do this off the top of our heads. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of analyses and interpretation that's been put into it, and so absolutely we are against gillnet fishing. Again, in the area near Sarstoon, north of Sarstoon, is one of the primary areas that destructive method continues to be used. And of course, we had a very recent incident in an area near to Monkey River called Rocky Point, where, you know, they were harvesting, like I said, indiscriminately with gillnets, and resulted in a lot of species being destroyed that were not their primary targets. And it's wreaking havoc on a lot of the species out there. In some cases, shark species, which is another issue, where we've come across, you know, hundreds of sharks being harvested, and again by the use of gillnets, and absolutely not something that we countenance or support.
Interestingly, while the Belize Coast Guard is against the use of gillnets, they have not been granted a space at the forward operating base, as only the Belize Defense Force soldiers have been placed there. This morning, the National Celebration Commission received a donation from the Republic of China, Taiwan for the upcoming September celebrations. To continue showing the good relationship and support, the Embassy of Taiwan donated $40,000 towards the cultural events. Chairperson of the National Celebrations Commission, Diane Haylock, spoke of the donation.
You know that the government of Belize is the principal financial donor for the activities, but as is usually the case, the resources that the government provides are never enough. So as the entity responsible for the Secretariat and, you know, co-chairing the September celebrations, we always try to see how we can seek additional support. And one of our stalwart, unwavering support has been the Embassy of Taiwan, who have donated generously to the cause, and as a result of that, we have a couple of the key events that that contribution normally support.
The donation is the 8th donation made by the Taiwanese Embassy to the NCC. Haylock spoke of the relationship between the two.
One of the things that I have always greatly appreciated since I took over the job is the respect that Taiwan pays, you know, to culture as part of their overall development agenda. And I think that their contribution to what we're trying to do here is an indication of the importance that they place on culture. We tend to normally hear more about the agriculture mission and these other things, but to my mind, from my understanding, you know, of their policies over the year, culture is an important pillar in their national development endeavors. And I think in that way, then, I think maybe they find it easy then to lend support to the national celebrations in Belize.
His Excellency Ambassador Benjamin Ho spoke of the continuous support to Belize during the September celebrations.
As you know, this is the 8th donation that my government made to NICH, okay, starting from when Dan became first the president of NICH. Okay. We've been working together for 8 years. This donation is all about sharing, because Belize Taiwanese, we are good friends. When you are joyfully celebrating your Independence Day, you want to share your joy. Okay. Besides, this is also a kind of cultural sharing, because in your celebration, the most important event, the highlights, your showcase about your culture, like Dana just mentioned, the pageant, the carnivals, and also the fun temple. Yeah. That's the highlight. That's the showcase of your culture, and we want to share with your wonderful people on this kinds of culture. Okay. Actually, the Panther, they have been invited to Taiwan twice to perform in Taiwan. They are eye-openers to Taiwanese. They are so popular with Taiwanese. Yeah, we are appreciative for that kind of exchange, thanks to the efforts of Diana.
The donation will be used for the Carnival King and Queen competition and the Panyard Steel Band concert. The Universal Postal Union has begun a training session in Belize with members of the Belize Postal Service. The training is focused on the Quality of Service Fund, which is a fund that is managed by the UPU to finance projects to improve the quality of service in national and international mail flow. Choi Han Chun, Program Manager at Universal Postal Union, spoke about the goals of the 4-day training.
This is a Quality of Service Fund workshop that's organized by the Universal Postal Union for the Caribbean region. The Quality of Service Fund is a fund that is set up to help developing countries and least developed countries to improve their quality of service of mail items, in particular the inbound mail items. So this is with the aim of improving the overall postal network worldwide. This workshop will focus on project formulation and submission, and of course project implementation. So for member countries that want to access the funds from the QSF, or in short for Quality of Service Fund, they have to follow certain procedures and processes to submit a project proposal in compliance with the principles set out in the Quality of Service Fund regulations. This workshop aims to enhance the understanding of the participants of the rules and processes and procedures of the regulations, and as well as to equip them with the necessary skills to formulate projects, to control the project implementation, and of course to report on the progress of the project.
According to Postmaster General James Gabriel, Belize has previously benefited from the Quality of Service Fund and is now seeking funds for a new initiative for speedier mail flow.
In the past, we have accessed this fund. Presently, our existing fleet of mail vans were purchased from this fund. Also, we had also purchased the bicycles that you see our postmen on. Those bicycles were purchased from this fund. As to what will be our next project, immediately we could see a need for the replacement of some of our mail vans, and that is one of the projects that we will be submitting.
Belize falls under the Caribbean Postal Union, which provides tactical support and recently formulated a training center. Wayne Smith, Secretary General of the Caribbean Postal Union, expands on this.
The Postal Union is to provide tactical support to its members, the aim of which is to provide them with the opportunity to improve efficiency, to ultimately become more innovative, customer-focused, and sustainable postal services throughout the region. So the Caribbean Postal Union is delighted to be a part of this program and is thankful to the Universal Postal Union, the Quality Service Fund Board, for putting this workshop together, because we understand that some of the member countries do not know how to access the Quality Service Fund. Some of us have been putting money into the fund for years, but not being able to access it and not understanding what types of forms to fill out, what criteria we must meet in order to be able to use those funds. And the workshop is definitely working. It is providing our members with knowledge that they can use to approach the Quality Service Fund Board and have access to the funds to implement various programs in the respective countries. So we're happy about that.
The training ends on Thursday. This morning, a concerned citizen came to our studios to tell us about an experience that she had last night. She brought a bag of Creole bread and bun that she purchased yesterday to our studios, which she says was filled with rodent feces. She claims that she and her son had eaten 2 of the buns when she realized she bit something hard. She spit it out and saw a black substance. The woman took the bread to the health department, which we can confirm she did. We spoke to one of the inspectors who told us they followed up on the issue and investigated the bakery where the bread came from. Officials say they also made several recommendations to the business but cannot confirm at this time if the black substance was indeed feces. Love News spoke to the owner of the bakery, who said that all that was on the bread was accumulated grease from the pans that are not completely washed so as to prevent the bread from sticking. The customer told us that she and her son have been feeling ill since they ate the bun. Director of the National Institute of Culture and History, Diane Haylock, will soon be leaving the post. Haylock is taking up a new international post as Belize's ambassador to Taiwan. Haylock, who has held the position for 8 years, says she hopes her successor will have the same sort of relationship she has with the Embassy of Taiwan. Haylock also commented on some of the work that she would like to achieve after acquiring her new post.
I have been doing this for 8 years, and in the 8 years, we have reached out to Taiwan and they have supported us unreservedly. I hope that my successor will have the same good luck with them. And I am certainly looking forward with great anticipation and excitement to taking on that new chapter in my life and witnessing firsthand more of the cultural offerings that Taiwan has to offer, and being involved in all the other areas of diplomacy that the job will require. I might be leaving this job, in terms of niche and culture, but for me, culture is near and dear to my heart. So whatever I can do there in the area of culture, I will certainly do it.
Haylock said her successor has not been selected as yet. Police in Punta Gorda have retrieved a weapon and have charged one person with kept firearm without a gun license. We hear more in this report from correspondent Paul Mahong.
Officer in Command Toledo Police Formation, Assistant Superintendent of Police Clement Cacho, spoke of the incident and related charges.
Friday, 8 July 2016, about 9:45 a.m., information was received by the Punta Gorda Police of a male person in Forest Home Village with what appeared to be a firearm. As a result of the information, police visited the village where they saw a male person dressed in camouflage clothing. Upon seeing the police, the male person threw what appeared to be a firearm in the bushes. The police then approached the said male person and took him to where they saw him throw the object and discovered a black in color .380 pistol bearing serial number T51314. As a result, the police traced the serial number and learned that the firearm is licensed to one Mike Espat. Mike Espat was later confronted, and he stated that the male person, who has been identified as Alan Ball, 46 years, is a caretaker for Mike Espat. However, Mr. Espat did not authorize him to have his firearm in his possession. As a result, Mr. Alan Ball was charged for kept firearm without a gun license, and he will be further charged for the crime of theft of the said firearm. He has been taken before the court as it relates to the kept firearm without a gun license, and he pleaded not guilty, and that has been adjourned until the 24th of August 2016.
ASP Cacho confirmed that Alan Ball remains remanded at Colby Foundation facilities in Hattieville. Reporting for Love News, Paul Mahong, Punta Gorda.
Police have charged Roaring Creek resident Ashton Puerto for the murder of 18-year-old Malik Norris. Puerto is expected to appear in Belmopan Magistrate Court on Wednesday. Norris was shot and killed on Sunday afternoon in Roaring Creek Village. A jury of 5 men and 4 women deliberated for almost 4 hours today in the Court of Justice Adolph Lucas before it found 23-year-old Brandon Bennett not guilty of the use of deadly means of harm with intent to commit grievous harm for the stabbing of Kent Moss Jr. The jury's verdict was unanimous. Bennett was charged with attempted murder, but that charge was withdrawn and the trial proceeded on a new indictment for only the charge of use of deadly means of harm. Moss was stabbed in the left side of his chest on September 16, 2011 at Memorial Park. Moss testified, but he was deemed a hostile witness because he refused to stick to the statement he gave to the police. He, however, admitted that he gave the statement to the police and it was admitted as evidence. Bennett gave a statement from the dock in which he said that it was a case of self-defense. He said Moss threw a bottle at him, which struck him in his left eye. Then Moss punched him 3 times and pushed his hand in his pocket and took out a .22 pistol. Bennett said he then drew a knife from the back pocket of his pants and stabbed Moss. He said Moss fell to the ground and the pistol flew from his hand. He said another man picked up the gun and ran into the crowd with it. He said he heard the man call out his name and the man began walking towards him with the firearm in his hand. He said his brother told the man to stop and then a police officer arrived on the scene, pointed his gun at him and told him to hand over the knife. Bennett said he gave the knife to his brother and his brother told the officer about the man who had the gun, but the man had already melted into the crowd. Bennett said the officer then detained him. Bennett was represented by attorneys Michelle Zuniga and Baja Schumann. Crown Counsel Shireen Rodriguez and Janelle Tillett represented the Crown. "31-year-old Jarrett Crawford, charged with aggravated assault upon a police officer with a firearm, was sentenced to 3 years today by the Chief Magistrate Anne-Marie Smith after he was found guilty of the charge. Crawford and 6 others were charged with robbery, conspiracy to commit robbery, and handling stolen goods in relation to the same incident, but those charges were withdrawn because the complainant did not want any further court action. The incident occurred on September 5, 2014 at a Chinese shop on Farbers Road. Police Corporal Barrington Flowers testified that based on information he received, he went to a Chinese shop on Farbers Road, and when he arrived there, he saw Crawford coming out of the shop with a firearm in his hand. Flowers, who was dressed in plain clothes, said he identified himself to Crawford, and Crawford fired several shots at him. Flowers said he drew his firearm and returned fire, and Crawford fired some more shots at him and ran into some bushes. Flowers said 2 other persons came out of the shop, and one of them, who had a knife in his hand, ran and escaped. Flowers said he detained the second person, who had some of the stolen items. Flowers testified that it was when he went to the police station the following day to identify the person he had detained, he saw that Crawford was in custody. Crawford was convicted for shooting at Flowers. A Coast Guard petty officer has returned from Mexico after being treated for injuries sustained in a shooting incident in April 2016. It is with much assistance from the Mexican Navy that Diego has managed to recover, as explained by Commander of the Belize Coast Guard, Admiral John Borland.
Our Mexican Navy counterparts have been stellar in their support to the Belize Coast Guard, and this is part of the cooperation mechanism that exists between the 2 forces and by extension the 2 states, meaning the country of Belize and the United States of Mexico. And you were absolutely right. Our petty officer Diego had an unfortunate accident back in April, I think to be specific on April 19th, where he got shot in his lower left leg. Spent the better part of 2 weeks here in Belize in the medical facility, where his situation deteriorated so rapidly that they were discussing removing his leg from day 3. I begged them not to because I thought his leg could be saved. We got the Mexican Navy involved around day 5. He went to Chetumal for some checks and examinations, and I think somewhere around day 14 he was airlifted again by the Mexican Navy to the Mexican Navy hospital in Mexico City, and he'd been there for 2 months. Eventually he lost his leg. He was tremendously infected with gangrene, almost to the point where he could have lost his life. So we are eternally grateful to the Mexican Navy, the Secretary of the Mexican Navy, and his people. Today we saw again the Mexican Navy flew in from Mexico City and brought Petty Officer Diego and handed him over to us. He's in good spirits. He's been there for 2 months, going through the rehabilitation process. They have the appropriate facilities at the Navy Hospital in Mexico. And so it's not just as a, you lost your leg, so that's it, the end of the road, you go home. No, he's in the process of being rehabilitated so he can be successfully integrated back into the armed forces at a job where he can execute competently as he was doing before. He's qualified for a number of jobs, so it's not because he lost his leg that he's going to be out of the force. No way.
Love News spoke with Petty Officer Class 3 Kevin Diego on his experience and his plans for the future.
The incident took place in Corozal, so I had to drive all the way to Belize for assistance because they didn't have the instrument to assist me in Corozal because I shattered a vein. So I came to Belize. A lot of time has passed since I got shot, so my foot began to die, and eventually the doctors at Karahushna tell me I have to lose my foot, and I wasn't ready to hear that. So I tell my family that I need to move from the hospital and try to get help somewhere else. We ended up in Chetumal. We were getting assistance in Chetumal. However, finance ran low. So we asked for further assistance from the Mexican Navy, and that's how I ended up in Mexico City. They've been really helpful. They taught me through everything. They got me translators, so I really understand everything that is taking place, and they are openly willing to assist me. So we became like a family. I did 2 surgeries on my foot, and from there on I did some strengthening the leg and the body, and I'm here today, 6 weeks, a little vacation. Then I go back to Mexico to work on getting my prosthetic and continue the rehabilitation.
The medical attention given to Diego runs in the thousands, but the finances were never an issue, says Admiral Borland.
They have taken care of all of those expenses from the moment they lifted him out of Belize just over 2 months ago. So it's not only him that they're looking after, because as you would imagine, he had to be accompanied by a member or members of his family. So they've provided the lodging and the feeding and all the other support systems that is necessary for that family to be there to take care of Petty Officer Diego in the rehabilitation process.
Officials of the Mexican Navy met with the Coast Guard Commander and the Chief Executive Officer, retired Colonel George Lovell. Members of the Mexican Navy were in Belize holding talks with officials of the Belize Coast Guard to further strengthen their cooperation in education, training, and other areas. Love News spoke with the Commander, Admiral John Borland, on the Memorandum of Understanding that he and his Mexican counterparts reviewed today.
today, secondary to the Mexican Navy bringing Diego back to Belize, where we're discussing and probably signing off on a cooperation agreement. So it exists right now in an informal manner, where it's perhaps just a gentleman's agreement, but it's by and large on the courtesy and the goodwill of the Secretary of the Mexican Navy. They don't say minister, they say secretary. So he's a great friend of mine, and he's proven to be, you know, beyond any praise that I can lay on him. So at this point, they're taking on all those expenses and all the support they've given us is by and large by the courtesy and the goodwill of the Secretary of the Mexican Navy. It speaks largely to training. As you know, in our efforts to build this Coast Guard, capacity building is big with every other department, but particularly so in the Belize Coast Guard, where we establish partnerships with a number of internationally, but also regionally, and most of all now with our next door neighbors, the Mexican Navy. And we're in their schools, to be honest. We are in the Mexican Navy Academy as we speak, and we are in their Special Forces School. The agreements are informal as we speak, but right now we intend to formalize them, and it's mainly for training, as I say, in all their institutions, being it professional institutions, technical or tactical, in the name of capacity building, and but we intend to take it even further than just education and training for instances just as the one that we're going through, where this man needed serious medical support and attention. And that's another point that is going to be addressed in that agreement.
Currently, there are Belizeans enlisted in naval schools in Mexico, with another selection preparing to leave next month. The Foreign Affairs Service of Belize is looking to relocate their Belize City offices from the Thurton building on Coney Drive to the Casa del Fiori on St. Mark Street in the Kings Park area. Today, a contract of sale was signed onto with the realtor of the three-story concrete structure, which will also house the Prime Minister's office and the office for the Special Envoy for Women and Children. The media was invited for today's signing between the realtor, the government, and the Taiwanese ambassador. According to Minister Elrington, having a place designated especially for foreign affairs was a plan in the making for some years now.
Perhaps the oldest person among us, the longest serving official of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is Ms. Gladys Bernard in front of me here. And I think she tells me that prior to independence, the people who later formed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs used to meet under the step in the National Assembly. That's how we started out prior to 1981 when we were trying to get our independence. And then I think it went to the Ednikian building. And then we are now begging lodging in the Nemo building in Belmopan. So after all these years, we have not had an office. But for about 10 years, the government and people of Taiwan has been giving funds to all the countries in SICA for the strengthening of their ministries of foreign affairs. And most of them, if not all of them, have built beautiful buildings, wonderful Ministry of Foreign Affairs buildings. When you go into those buildings, you really feel different. Belize is the only place that never had a building, that never used the funds for the construction of a building. We use the funds, but for different purposes. So when we got into office, myself and the former CEO, Alexis Rosado, said this has to change. We have got to leave a legacy, a lasting, visible legacy, so that the government and people of Taiwan can see what we have done with the funds that they've been giving us so generously.
The government had broken ground for the construction of a new building in Belmopan in December of 2015, but the works never happened. The new structure that houses the offices is a gift from Taiwan. Taiwan's ambassador to Belize, His Excellency Benjamin Ho, spoke of when he first served in Belize about 27 years ago and his memory of how the offices were.
As I recall, when I was here last time, 27 years ago, I worked with Ms. Bernard. long time. Yeah, for a long time we are close friends. Yeah. Whenever we went there, okay, but this one for us is very small, okay, small rooms. Yeah. Now finally you got your home. This house, okay, well, I would assume is one of the best, if not the best, in the whole Belize city. Location-wise, it's pivotal. Yeah, because when you have foreign dignitaries come here, it's much easier for them to come here for conference or whatever, for receptions. Yeah, okay. So I want to congratulate you. Okay. As Minister Arlington mentioned, okay, actually, I came here early this year. Carlos brought me here because I was looking for an office for my embassy. Okay. Yeah. Then when I saw this one, I said, I'm going to take it. I told him immediately, but I said, be patient because I expect we are going to change our government. That's what happened in the past May. Yeah. So give me some time, then I'm going to report to my government. I assume my new government would make the decision because that former government won't make any decision before the transition of the government. Yeah. Then after a couple of months, he informed me, also Minister informed me, they're interested to buy this one. Okay. Well, Minister Arlington, we are good friends, you know, and heart and soul and Belizean. Okay, so I'm so glad you can have it, yeah. Okay, because also I help you, you help me too, because I don't have the history to track all the way to Belmopan to meet you under Prime Minister.
The structure on property was bought for $1.5 million and paid fully by the Taiwan government. Our thought conditioner for today is from Amit Ray. It reads, and we quote, "Only the brave men and women can bring peace to the world, not by practicing war, but by practicing non-violence." This has been the Evening News on Love Television. We invite you to log on to our website at www.lovefm.com for transcripts of our news stories. Thank you for watching. I am Ernesto Vasquez.